I'm Walter Maddox, 71 years old, and I spent 30 years letting my son believe I was a broke old fool who fixed lawnmowers in a leaky garage. So when his fiance's father slid a folded $100 bill across the table at the rehearsal dinner and told me to go get yourself a real suit, champ, in front of 40 people, I just smiled and put it in my shirt pocket. By the end of that month, that man was signing over his house keys to a company he never knew I owned. Stay with me and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated by people who had no idea what you were capable of. Let me back up. My wife, Ruth, died when our boy Caleb was 9. Ovarian cancer. It took her in 14 months, and it took most of who I used to be along with her. I had a small machine shop back then, just getting off the ground, and I made a decision standing in that hospital parking lot that I've questioned every single day since. I decided I'd raise Caleb to know the value of a dollar. Ruth and I had talked about it near the end. How we didn't want our son turning into one of those country club kids who think the world owes them a soft landing. So I kept the shop quiet. I kept us in the same little 3-bedroom ranch in Dayton. I drove a truck I bought used in 1998 and kept running on stubbornness and duct tape. What I didn't tell Caleb was that the machine shop grew. It grew into a tooling company. And that tooling company landed defense contracts, and by the time he was in high school, I had quietly built something worth more than our whole zip code. I put it all into a holding company, Granger Industrial, named after the street where Ruth grew up. I had a lawyer in Columbus who knew the truth, a man named Otis Reinhardt who'd been with me since the beginning, and nobody else on this earth knew that Walter Maddox, the guy who showed up to parent-teacher night in coveralls, was worth what I was worth. I thought I was protecting his soul. I thought I was keeping him humble. What I actually did was teach him to be ashamed of me. He stopped inviting me to things in college. Said the parking at his fraternity was bad. Said the events were kind of a networking thing, Dad. You'd be bored. I paid his tuition in cash. Every semester I walked into that bursar's office and wrote a check from an account he thought was my entire life savings, and he never once asked how a lawnmower repairman afforded an out-of-state private school. He just took it. I told myself that was fine. I told myself a lot of things. Then he met Brienne. I want to be fair about Brienne because for a long time I tried to be. She was sharp and pretty and she laughed easily. And the first time Caleb brought her home, she ate my pot roast and told me it was the best she'd ever had. But Brienne came from money, or from the appearance of money, which I'd come to learn is a very different thing. Her father, a man named Sterling Boss, ran a commercial real estate outfit in Cincinnati and wore his success like cologne. You could smell it across the room. And from the moment Sterling Boss laid eyes on me, he had me filed and shelled. Old, old, poor, irrelevant. The wedding was set for the third Saturday in October at a restored estate outside Cincinnati, the kind of place with valet parking and a man whose entire job was to light the candles. Brianne's family was paying for most of it, a fact Sterling mentioned roughly every 9 minutes. 300 guests. A swing band. An open bar with top-shelf bourbon I'd later learn was rented, not bought, by the bottle and return half full. The rehearsal dinner was the first real shot across the bow. They sat me at the far end of a long table, down by the kitchen doors, next to an empty chair and Brianne's great aunt who was hard of hearing and kept asking me to repeat myself. Caleb sat at the other end, up by the Vosses, laughing at something Sterling said. My boy was wearing a suit that cost more than I let him think I made in 2 months. I sat there in my good jacket, the navy blazer I'd had since Ruth's funeral, and I told myself it didn't matter where I sat. I was there for my son. Sterling stood up to give a toast halfway through. He talked about family and legacy and the importance of marrying up in life in every sense. People chuckled. Then he wandered down to my end of the table with his wine glass and he leaned down close and in a voice just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, he said, Walt, let me give you a little something. He took out his wallet. He pulled out $100 bill, folded it once, and set it by my plate. Go get yourself a real suit for tomorrow, champ. You're representing both families now. A few people laughed. Brianne's cousins mostly. I looked down that long table at Caleb, and I waited for my son to stand up. I waited for him to say, that's my father, and you'll speak to him with respect. He looked at me. He saw the bill on the table. And then he looked back at Sterling and he smiled, a small, embarrassed smile, and he shrugged like, what can you do? That shrug. I felt it land somewhere under my ribs and stay there. I picked up the 100. I folded it again and put it in my shirt pocket and I said, thank you, Sterling. That's mighty generous. And I meant something by it that none of them understood yet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the desk in my hotel room, and I thought about Ruth and what she'd say if she could see what I'd made of the promise we made each other. We wanted to raise a man who valued people over money. Instead, I'd raised one who was so afraid of looking poor that he let a stranger humiliate his own father and said nothing. The wedding itself was beautiful, I'll give them that. The trees out on the estate grounds had just started to turn, all gold and rust, against a hard blue October sky. I sat in the second row on the groom's side because no one had thought to save me a seat in the first. I watched my son marry Brienne and I felt two things at once, which is a strange way to feel. I felt proud of the man he looked like, standing up there, and I felt like I was watching a stranger. At the reception, they put me at table 19. There were 19 tables. It was tucked behind a pillar, half hidden, the kind of table where they seat the people they had to invite but hoped wouldn't come. The centerpiece was smaller than the others. I noticed that a man notices the small things when he's been made small, his whole life on purpose, even when he did it to himself. I was nursing a club soda when Sterling found me again. He'd been drinking. His face had that loose, shiny look of a man Ford Bourbon's in, and he had two of his business associates with him, both wanting to be entertained. "Walt!" he boomed, like we were old friends. "You came in that truck I saw in the lot? The Ford with the bumper held on by a prayer?" "I did," I said. "That's incredible. That's just." He turned to his associates. "This is Caleb's father. Self-made man. Fixed sticks, small engines. Real salt of the earth." One of the men asked, kindly enough, what kind of engines. Before I could answer, Sterling cut in. "Doesn't matter. Listen, Ward. I'll be straight with you because I respect you." He didn't respect me. "My daughter is moving into a different world now, the Voss world. And I need to know you understand that. We can't have you showing up to Thanksgiving in that truck, you understand. It reflects on all of us. I'm happy to help you out. Get you set up with something presentable. A man your age shouldn't be driving a death trap." I looked at him for a long moment. "That's a kind offer," I said. And then Brienne came over and I thought, here it is. Here's where it turns. But she didn't come to defend me. She put her hand on her father's arm and she said, "Daddy, the photographer wants the families for pictures." And then she looked at me, my new daughter-in-law, and she said, "Walter, maybe you could sit this one out. The lighting's tricky and we're trying to keep the frame cohesive." She smiled when she said it. That was the worst part. She smiled like she was doing me a favor, so they took the family photos without me. I stood behind the photographer and watched my son pose with the Vosses, all of them gleaming, and not one person turned around to wave me in. I left the reception before the cake. Nobody noticed. I drove home that night and I didn't turn the radio on. I pulled into my cracked driveway in Dayton around 1 in the morning and I sat in the truck for a while in the dark. Then I went inside and I didn't turn on the lights and I walked to the back of the house to the room I called my office, which was really just a converted bedroom with a desk and Ruth's old reading chair. "There's a floor safe under the rug back there." I rolled the rug back and spun the dial. Inside, there was no cash and no jewelry. There was a phone I hadn't turned on in 2 years and a single manila folder. I powered up the phone and called the one number it knew. Otis answered on the second ring even though it was past 1. "Walter," he said. "It's late. Everything all right?" "No," I said. "It's time." There was a pause. Otis had been waiting for this call for the better part of 2 decades, I think. He told me more than once that the disguise would cost me something I couldn't get back. "You're sure?" he said. "Once we move, the quiet's gone. Caleb will know everything. He let a man hand me $100 and tell me to buy a real suit," I said. "And then he turned away. So did his bride. I'm done being a ghost in my own life, Otis." "All right," he said, and his voice changed, got crisp, the way it does when he's working. "What do you want to know first?" "Tell me about Sterling Voss," I said. "Tell me exactly what he's made of." I drove to Columbus the next morning. Otis's office is on the 18th floor of a glass building downtown, all clean lines and quiet money. He had folders laid out on the conference table when I walked in, still wearing the same clothes from the wedding, because I hadn't been able to make myself change them. "Sterling Voss," Otis said, sliding the first folder over, "is a man standing on a trapdoor and bragging about the view." I opened it. Page after page of numbers, most of them in red. "Voss Commercial Holdings looks impressive from the street," Otis said. big portfolio of retail and office space across southern Ohio and northern Kentucky. But the man over-leveraged badly during the low-interest years. He borrowed against everything to buy more, and then office space cratered after everybody started working from home. And now he's got 3 buildings sitting half empty bleeding money he doesn't have. He's been making interest-only payments on a mountain of debt and praying the market turns around. And it hasn't. It's gotten worse. Otis tapped the page. His whole operation is held together by one thing. His flagship property, a shopping and office complex off the interstate. It's the only asset still throwing off real cash. He's using it as collateral to refinance everything else. If that refinance goes through, he buys himself another 2 years. If it doesn't, the whole thing comes down inside 90 days. I sat back. And who holds the note on the flagship? Otis smiled, just a little. It was not a warm smile. That's the part I've been saving. The building sits on land leased from a development trust. Voss doesn't own the ground his crown jewel stands on. He pays rent on it, has for 11 years. To whom? To a subsidiary of Granger Industrial, Otis said. Walter, you bought that land in 2013 through a holding company 3 layers deep. Sterling Voss has been writing you a check every single month for over a decade, and he has no idea. The man who told you to go buy a real suit is your tenant. I looked out that big window at the city below for a long time. Ruth used to say the Lord has a sense of humor, and I think she was right. What's the play? I asked. Otis walked me through it slow, because Otis never lets me move in anger. The ground lease was up for renewal in 5 weeks. Sterling was counting on it renewing automatically, the way it had twice before, because he needed that stability locked in before the bank would approve his refinance. The refinance and the lease were dominoes. Knock one down at the right time and they all go. We can simply decline to renew the ground lease, Otis said, quietly, by the book. The moment we do, his flagship is sitting on land that's reverting to us, and the bank pulls the refinance because the collateral's no longer secure. Voss commercial defaults on roughly 40 million in debt inside the quarter. Then do it, I said. There's more, Otis said. Does the matter of your son? I'd been waiting for that. Caleb works for Voss now, Otis said gently. Started 6 months ago. Priyank got him the job. He's a junior asset manager at Voss Commercial, making a salary that's all show and no substance. Walter, when this company goes down, Caleb goes down with it. He'll lose the job, and more than that, Otis slid another paper across. Your son co-signed on something. My stomach dropped before I even read it. 3 weeks before the wedding, Caleb and Brian had taken out a loan to buy a condo in a high-rise in downtown Cincinnati. $400,000. And the down payment, the part that made the whole thing possible, had come from a line of credit Sterling pulled against Voss Commercial. Caleb's name was on the condo. His name was tangled up in the financing. When Voss collapsed, the bank would come for that condo, and they'd come for whatever else they could reach, and my son's credit and his marriage and his whole new life would be standing in the path of it. If we pull the lease, Otis said quietly, we don't just sink Sterling, we sink Caleb. I sat there a long while. I thought about Caleb at 9 years old, the night Ruth died, climbing into my lab in the hospital chapel and asking me if he could still go to school the next day because he had a spelling test, because he didn't know what else to do with himself, and neither did I. I thought about all the spelling tests after that, all the years, all the checks. A different father would have stopped right there. A different father would have eaten the insult and protected his boy from his own father-in-law's stupidity. But then I thought about the shrug, the $100 bill folded by my plate. Maybe you could sit this one out, Walter. He chose them, I said. He had 100 chances to choose me, and he chose them every time. He's a grown man, Otis. He picked his family. Let him find out what that family's actually made of. Otis nodded slowly. There's a way to do this, he said, that protects Caleb if he proves he's worth protecting. Hear me out. Here's what we did. We didn't decline the lease right away. We let Sterling keep planning. In fact, Sterling, riding high on the wedding and the soon-to-be-approved refinance, did something that made the whole thing easier. He scheduled a big investor luncheon at the flagship property for the first Friday in November, to celebrate the refinance he was sure was coming and to drum up new capital. He invited everyone who mattered in Cincinnati commercial real estate, bankers, partners, the press, even a couple of business reporters. And he invited me. He didn't actually. Caleb did. Or rather, Brian did, through Caleb, and I knew why the second I got the call. Caleb phoned me the first time he'd called in 2 months, and his voice had that strained brightness people get when they want something. Dad, hey, so Sterling's got this thing coming up. A business luncheon at the property downtown. It's a big deal, lot of important people. And, a pause. Brianne and I were talking. We think it'd be good for you to come. See what the family's building. Sterling's actually been worried he was too hard on you at the wedding. I knew what this was. Sterling wasn't worried about anything. Sterling wanted the genteel old sort of the earth father-in-law to show up and stand quietly in the corner so he could point at me and tell his investors a story about humble beginnings and family values. I was a prop. You should come, Dad, Caleb said. Wear the navy blazer. It's fine. It's fine. Like he was granting permission. I'll be there, I said. The flagship property was something to see. Sterling had spent money he didn't have making it shine. There was a big atrium on the ground floor, glass 3 stories up, with a catered spread and a string quartet and maybe 200 people in good clothes drinking wine at noon on a Friday. I parked my truck right out front in a fire lane. The valet nearly had a stroke. I handed him the keys and a 20 and told him to leave it where it was. I wore the navy blazer. But underneath it, I wore a different man. I'd spent the weeks before this not idle. I'd gone to a tailor in Columbus, a serious one, and I'd bought myself a charcoal suit that fit like it had opinions about me. It was the first new suit I'd owned in 15 years. I'd looked at myself in the 3-way mirror and I'd barely recognized the man looking back. And I'll tell you the truth, my eyes had stung a little because I thought about how long I'd hidden him. I left the suit jacket in the truck. I wore the navy blazer into the atrium because I wanted Sterling comfortable. I wanted him exactly as arrogant as he'd been at the wedding. He spotted me and came striding over, all teeth. Walt, you made it, folks. This is my daughter's father-in-law. Don't let the modest exterior fool you. This is a working man. He clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to sting. What can I get you? We've got a nice cab open, or there's beer if that's more your speed. I'm fine, I said. Caleb was there in a suit, looking nervous. Brianne stood beside him in something expensive, scanning the room the way her father did, taking inventory. She gave me a little wave with her fingers. Neither of them came over to stand with me. Around noon, Sterling tapped a glass and got everyone's attention. He stood up on a little riser they'd set up by the quartet, and he beamed out at the room. Friends, partners, family, thank you for coming. Today's a celebration. As many of you know, Boss Commercial is about to close on a major refinancing that will position us for the next decade of growth. Applause. This building, this flagship, is the heart of everything we do. And I want you to know it is rock solid. We own this corner of the city, and we're not going anywhere. I set down my club soda. I walked up toward the riser. Slow. People stepped aside without quite knowing why, the way they do when someone walks like he has somewhere to be. Sterling watched me come, and for the first time, a little flicker of confusion crossed his face, because this wasn't the script. The prop was supposed to stay in the corner. Walt, he said, half laughing. You need something, buddy. I'd like to say a few words, I said, about this building. He didn't know how to refuse in front of 200 people without looking like a man who couldn't handle a kindly old relative, so he chuckled and spread his arms. Of course, Caleb's dad, everybody. Salt of the earth. I took the microphone out of his hand. My name is Walter Maddox, I said, and my voice carried clean across that glass atrium. Most of you don't know me. Sterling here likes to introduce me as a man who fixes small engines, and that's true, I did that for a lot of years. What he doesn't know, what nobody in this room knows except my attorney standing in the back there, is that I also own the ground this building is standing on. The room got quiet in a way you could feel on your skin. Sterling laughed, but it came out wrong. Walt? Ha, I think you've had Gleanger Industrial, I said. Through a development trust, 3 companies deep, I bought this land in 2013. Sterling, you've been paying me rent for 11 years. Every month, I've got the checks. I watched it hit him. I watched the blood leave his face, one shade at a time. That ground lease, I went on, comes up for renewal in 11 days. And I want everyone in this room, especially the gentleman from the bank I see standing by the window there, to hear this clearly. I have declined to renew it. I let that sit. Which means the collateral securing the refinance Sterling just bragged about is gone. There is no rock-solid flagship. There's a building on borrowed land, owned by a company that's $40 million underwater. run by a man who doesn't own the dirt under his own feet. Somebody's wine glass cracked against the floor. A reporter near the front had her phone out, filming. Sterling lunged for the microphone. This is insane. This man is senile. Somebody get him out. I didn't let go. I'm 71 years old and I have never been tearer in my life. 3 weeks ago, at my son's rehearsal dinner, you handed me $100 bill and told me to go buy a real suit. You told me my truck was an embarrassment. You told me my daughter-in-law that I should sit out the family photos so I wouldn't ruin the frame. My eyes found Brienne in the crowd. She'd gone white. I've been underestimated my whole life, Sterling, by people who thought a man in coveralls couldn't possibly matter. You're just the most recent. The bankers were already moving toward the door, phones to their ears. And then I looked at my son. Caleb was standing frozen in the middle of that crowd, and his face God. His face. It wasn't the smug embarrassment from the rehearsal dinner. It was a boy's face, lost, the way he'd looked in that hospital chapel, because he understood all at once that everything was coming down, and that his name was on a condo financed through the very company about to implode, and that the father he'd let a man insult had been the one holding all the cards the entire time. I'd planned, in the dark version of this, to let him drown with the rest of them. Otis had drawn up the papers 2 ways. One protected Caleb. One didn't. I had both in my breast pocket. I looked at my boy across that room, and I made a choice I'm still not entirely sure was the right one. Except that Ruth was in it somewhere. I lowered the microphone and I walked over to him. Through the chaos, the bankers fleeing and Sterling shouting and Brienne already on the phone screaming at someone, and I stood in front of my son. Did you know? I asked him. Quiet, just for us. About the condo. About where Sterling got the down payment money. Did you know it was leveraged against a company that was already drowning? His mouth worked. Dad, I didn't, I thought. And then smaller, I didn't ask, I didn't want to know. That's the truest thing you've said to me in years, I said. He started to cry. A grown man in an expensive suit, crying in the middle of his father-in-law's collapsing empire. I'm so sorry, he said. Dad, the rehearsal dinner. I knew the second he did it, I should have stood up. I've been sick about it. I let them make me ashamed of you, and you never gave me one single reason to be ashamed of anything. Not once in my whole life. I tell you, I'd built up something hard in my chest over those weeks. Cold and clean and certain. And it cracked right down the middle when my boy said that. Here's what's going to happen, I told him. You're going to walk out of this building with me right now. You're going to leave this job. The condo's already gone. You just don't know it yet. But I've made sure the bank can't after your personal credit. Beyond it. That part I took care of 3 days ago, before I knew if I would. I want you to understand that. I protected you before I knew whether you deserved it. That's the difference between how I love you and how these people love you. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. As for the rest of it, I said, your wife and her father are about to find out what they're actually made of. That's not your war. But you're going to have to decide tonight whether you're a Maddox or a Voss. I can't make that one for you, son. We walked out together, past Sterling, who was grey and shaking and saying my name over and over like it was a question he couldn't answer. Past Brian, who looked at Caleb walking beside me and shouted his name sharp, a command, the same tone her father used. Caleb stopped. He looked at her, and he looked at me, and then he looked at the floor for a long second. I'll call you, he told her, and he kept walking. Sterling Voss lost everything inside 4 months. The refinance died the day the bank heard about the lease. The defaults came like dominoes, just like Otis said. The flagship reverted to my development trust, and I leased it back out to a healthcare network that actually pays its bills. Sterling and his wife sold the big house outside Cincinnati and moved into a rental. Last I heard, he was doing consulting work, which is what men like Sterling call it when nobody will hire them anymore. Brienne filed for divorce from Caleb that winter, which surprised exactly no one since there wasn't a Voss fortune left to be married into. She found out, the hard way, the same lesson I'd accidentally taught my son, that money you marry into isn't yours, and money that isn't real was never there at all. Caleb moved back to Dayton. He lives 20 minutes from me now. He came to me 3 weeks after the luncheon and asked if there was a place for him at Granger Industrial. Not as a gift, he said, but at the bottom, learning, the way I started. I told him the bottom is exactly where I wanted him. He's been running a shift at the original machine shop for 8 months now. The same shop I opened the year before he was born. And he comes over on Sundays and we don't talk about money at all. We talk about his mother, mostly. He started asking about Ruth, who she was, and I tell him, and we're both better for it. I never spent that $100 bill. It's still in my dresser drawer, folded the way Sterling folded it. Some nights I take it out and look at it and I think about the man I was at that rehearsal dinner, sitting down by the kitchen doors, deciding in that moment that the time for hiding was over. I gave most of it away in the end. Glinger Industrial set up a trust last spring, a fund for the kids in Dayton and Cincinnati who work after-school jobs to help their families keep the lights on. The kids nobody at a country club will ever notice. Full rides. No strings. I named it after Ruth McQuoin. Ever notice. Full rides. No strings. I named it after Ruth. I figure she'd rather have her name on that than on a building. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. The 30 years of pretending, the disguise that backfired and nearly cost me my son. And the honest answer is yes. I do. I taught my boy to be ashamed of exactly the wrong thing, and it took a stranger throwing $100 at me to wake us both up. I'd do almost all of it differently if I could, but I'll tell you what I learned. Sitting at table 19 behind that pillar, watching my family pose for pictures without me. Blood doesn't make somebody family. Showing up does. Standing up does. And the people who measure you by your truck and your jacket and the size of your bank account will never once, not for a single day, be the people worth burning your life down for. My son figured that out eventually. Late, but he figured it out. And on a Sunday afternoon in October, almost exactly a year after that wedding, he sat across from me at my kitchen table eating pot roast. And he said, "Dad, this is the best I've ever had." And he meant it this time. And that was worth more than every dollar I ever hid. That folded $100 bill in my dresser drawer taught me something it took me 71 years and one collapsing empire to understand. Sterling Voss didn't fall because I knocked him down. He fell because he built his whole life on a piece of ground he never owned and called it solid. That's the part nobody wants to hear. The water he threw, the suit he mocked, the photos I got cut out of. None of that was the real damage. The real damage was the lie he told himself every single day. That money he borrowed was money he had. That a name could hold up a foundation that was already rotting underneath. A man like that doesn't get destroyed. He just runs out of time. And somebody finally turns the lights on. And I have to be honest about my own part in it, because I caused half of what happened to my son. I thought hiding who I was would make Caleb humble. Instead, I taught him that the wrong things make a man worth respecting. He learned to read a price tag before he learned to read a person, and that's on me. I spent 30 years protecting his comfort when I should have been building his character. The two are not the same thing, and I confused them for most of his life. If I could put one thing in the hands of every young person watching this, it wouldn't be money. I've got money, and it nearly cost me my only son. It would be three things that no inheritance can buy. The first is a spine straight enough to do right by people even when it embarrasses you, because the day Caleb stayed seated while a stranger insulted his own father was the day he found out exactly how soft his backbone had gotten. The second is the kind of clear-eyed sense to look at what's actually in front of you instead of what people want you to believe is there. If my boy had asked one honest question about where Sterling's down payment money came from, he'd have seen the cliff before he walked off it. And the third is the grit to start over at the bottom when you've lost everything, the way Caleb did when he came back to Dayton and asked for the lowest shift in my shop, not as a gift but earned. You can give a child every advantage and still hand him nothing that lasts, or you can raise him to stand up straight, to think for himself, and to keep getting up after the world knocks him flat. I learned that the long way, sitting at tables 19 behind a pillar, watching my family pose for pictures without me. Don't learn it the way I did. Biz the person first. The rest is just dirt under the building, and dirt belongs to whoever was patient enough to buy it quietly.